7. 3, 2, and 1.
Thank you. Welcome to the City Council meeting of October 17th, 2024. I will call this meeting to order at 7:31 p.m. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Do we have any requests to join remotely?
Councilmember Davis will be joining us via teleconference, but no request has been made under roll call item A.
Great, thank you. City Clerk, roll call, please.
Councilmember Cunningham?
Here.
Councilmember Davis?
Here.
Councilmember Lentz?
Here.
Councilmember Mackin?
Here.
And Mayor O'Connell.
Here. Can I get a first and a second to adopt the agenda as it stands?
So moved.
Second.
I did have a request to close in memory of the people who lost their lives in Loma Prieta 35 years ago. Can we add that to the agenda?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. And so do we need to remake that motion?
I think it's okay.
Okay?
We'll adopt the agenda as amended.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to oral communications number 1. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on an item that is not on our agenda tonight?
Do we have to do the roll call, though, for the agenda?
Oh, we do have to do roll call for the agenda.
Roll call vote. Councilmember Cunningham?
Aye.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz?
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin?
Aye.
And Mayor O'Connell.
Aye. Sorry about that. I forget
Yeah, no worries.
because we have someone online. So oral communications. I don't see anyone I don't have any slips from anyone in the audience. I do see a hand raised from Peter Sutherland.
Go ahead, Peter.
I just want to be on the roll call. I'm present, but do not wish to speak at this time.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Thank you.
We hear you, Peter.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, we will move on to awards and presentations. And tonight we have a proclamation for Domestic Violence Prevention Month. Domestic Violence Awareness and Prevention Month 2024. Whereas more than 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men and 1 in 2 transgender individuals experience some form of physical or sexual violence and or stalking by their intimate partner in their lifetime. And whereas the marginalization of certain groups in society, including undocumented individuals, transgender individuals, and people living with disabilities, increases their vulnerability to domestic violence. And whereas there were 8,275 requests for service through Community Overcoming Relationship Abuse, CORA, 24-hour crisis line, and law enforcement referrals last year, and 3,278 adults and teens received community education on healthy relationships and the impacts of intimate partner abuse. Whereas in San Mateo County, 94 adults and children were provided emergency shelter, and 76 households were provided longer-term rental assistance to escape their abusers last year. And whereas 485 adults and children received therapy to help them with domestic violence-related trauma, and Cora fielded 1,925 requests for legal assistance. And whereas the City of Brisbane recognizes the critical need for countywide services in order to support our residents, and whereas intimate partner violence continues to be among the most underreported crimes, and the City of Brisbane is committed to eliminating all forms of intimate partner abuse. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that the City Council of the City of Brisbane hereby designates the month of October 2024 as Domestic Violence Awareness and Prevention Month, to raise awareness about and encourage all residents to do their part to help rid our community of intimate partner violence. And tonight we have Lynn Schuette here to accept the proclamation. If you'd like to step forward.
Thank you.
I think we have someone who wants to get a picture, if you want to turn around for a second.
Very good.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, if you'd like to say a few words.
So thank you for inviting us to accept this proclamation. Every year in October, it's great to be able to shine the light on what domestic violence is and to let folks know that we are here in San Mateo County providing support for people every day. So I know that we don't have a lot of people online right now, but I know some people watch this video later. I want to give you the 1-800 number to call if you or somebody you know may be in need. That's 1-800-300-1080. What you get when you call that phone number is a live person, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, who can help talk to you and figure out what's going on and to help maybe create a safety plan or access any number of our programs. We provide everything from the hotline to subsidized housing. We provide probably about $1 million in subsidized housing vouchers for folks in this county every year, which is, think about how much rent costs. It's about 40 families a year at any point in time. So people cycle in and out. We have emergency shelters where we have 28 beds, and those are in safe, confidential locations so people can gather themselves and get ready to rebuild their lives. We have counseling and we have legal services. So if somebody needs an emergency protective order or anything that's related to their abuse, they have that ability. And by the way, all these services are provided free of charge. We do not charge anybody. So those are intervention services that anybody can access in San Mateo County, 1-800-300-1080. We also have a close working relationship with the police departments throughout the county, including Brisbane. And whenever a 911 call comes in, the police, they file a report, they talk to our staff and get that person connected to services that I mentioned. We're also working on prevention. So this last year, we've been working on something called Speak Up, where we go talk to businesses, because a lot of businesses, they either have employees or customers that they suspect something's going on, but they really aren't sure. So the city of San Carlos, in response to the murder that happened in their town in September of 2022, said, we want something to be done about this. And so we created together this program called Speak Up, which works with our local businesses to talk about what is domestic violence, what are some of the red flags, and what can you do as a business in town, whether it's your employee or your customer, what are some things to say or not say? And so in 11 cities in this county, we made over 200 contacts per city, over 60 trainings per city to provide exactly those trainings. So intervention and prevention, and I haven't even scratched the surface. Please go to our website, corasupport.org, or if you need help, 1-800-300-1080. And again, thank you for this proclamation. And for anybody who's listening, please do call us.
Thank you. What an
Thank you.
important safety net.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lon.
Thank you. That moves us on to item C, the Great Shakeout Earthquake Preparedness Update. And City Engineer Randy Barreau, your presentation, please.
Yes, ma'am. Honorable Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members, good evening. Thank you very much. While the clerk's bringing this up, the first stage of the staff report, I'll just quickly explain why we are doing this rather brief presentation. It actually segues very nicely into your amended agenda. An organization known as the Earthquake Country Alliance annually sponsors an event called Shakeout, the Great Shakeout. And what they're intending to do is give people a sense of being prepared for seismic activities. And we're tearing off of this and trying to remind folks that individual preparedness is an individual responsibility, but there are, of course, multiple resources available for you to do that. We'll show you a little bit of that on here. And if I'm correct, I believe North County Fire Authority is also sponsoring an event this month, October the 29th. I know it's available on Zoom. I'm not sure if it's also available in person, but I'm sure that Matt and Caroline will be pushing that out across the various media forums that we have. So that'll get out there as well. If we could go to, yeah, that's a great page to start at, actually. Can you make that smaller, please, Ingrid, so we can see the whole page? I'm fine with showing 2 slides at a time. Yeah. Just do. I'm sorry. If it's too hard, just leave it that way. We'll scroll down. So the reason I want to point this out, if you could move that up just a little bit. So if you go to their website, and that's what I'm really looking for, is things that are marked there in the hypertext. And of course, we can't see it now because there's something. That's perfect right there. Thank you so much. So if you go to that website, you will be able to access all of this information that's on here, plus quite a significant amount more. They talk about it in the 7 steps to earthquake safety, which is just the way they've got it programmed. And if you scroll up or down, whatever way you want to call it. Yeah, move that up. If you go to it, if you go to their first step, you'll get worksheets that look like this or things you can fill out. The things I really like about this is you can do as much or as little of this as you want. You just start it one at a time, chunk your way through it. Next one, please. We'll keep going up. Of course, first thing we always recommend you have is to have a fire extinguisher in your home, to know how to use it. And I know that if we want to have trainings on that, we can do that over at Station 81, so it's a great thing for the public to do. Next slide, please. It's another great example of just, disaster supplies checklist. What sort of things ought you to have? Sometimes it's very confusing for people. They don't know where to start. Again, this is why we encourage you to go to the Earthquake Country Organization website. Next slide, please. Under bed bags, this is the things that people just forget a lot of times. Unfortunately, what happens in earthquakes is glass tends to break, mirrors tend to fall, and if you're wandering around in your bare feet without a flashlight, you will inevitably step in that and hurt yourself. So we always do encourage you to have those items, and we also encourage you to have those items if you have a go bag in your car. I tell people repeatedly, my family has those in their cars because I did it, and sometimes one person in the family has to be the person to be prepared. My wife has yet to find her gardening sneakers from many years ago because I took those and I tied it to her go bag in the back of her car, because sometimes when women are about, they wear very stylish and good-looking shoes that don't make walking long distances comfortable if you're trapped somewhere because a bridge is down. So the sneakers are there, and it's just things we encourage people to do. Next slide, and we're coming up quickly to the big drop, cover, and hold on. This is something we've tried to teach people for years. We used to teach it in the schools. I don't think we do that anymore. Why do we teach drop, cover, and hold on if you're feeling seismic activities? Because stuff like this will occasionally fall down. Even when things are seismically braked, if you're just standing there, waiting for drop-down ceilings to hit you or for large projectors to come down and bounce you on your head, you're likely to get hurt. So we do encourage you to go ahead and go to the next one. Noreen, Ingrid. You can tell I'm just back from vacation. I don't know who I'm talking to anymore. So the first thing, of course, we want you to do is we want you to drop down, get on the ground. We want you to do that because you're much less likely to get thrown around the room in a major earthquake if you're already on the ground. So you choose to go to the ground rather than the earthquake putting you there. Next one, please. Then we're talking about cover. We want you to protect your head and the back of your neck, just like you would do in many other activities. If you're being attacked by someone, you want to protect the vulnerable parts of your body. The same thing. This is Mother Earth trying to throw things at you, and we want you to protect yourself from that. Last one, please. And then, thank you. That's know how to protect yourself, so it's hold on. If you happen to be under a desk, grab a hold of it, grab a hold of something sturdy, and try and stop yourself again from being rocked around, even if you are on the ground. The next one, adapt your situation. Again, I think I just threw that in there because I really like the fact that this is set up for multiple audiences. This, you can see in there that they show if somebody has a cane, somebody's using a walker, if somebody is wheelchair bound. It's a lot of information out there that you can make and you can avail yourself to. Next slide. Earthquake early warning. This slide and the next slide both just show you that you can sign up for Earthquake Warning California. You can download the MyShake app. I found that it gives you some advance notice. It doesn't give you 5 minutes advance notice of an app, but it gives you in the order of a number of seconds. But for many people, that's important. For many people, it's reassuring. So if that's something that folks want to do, and if that's a good part of your earthquake preparedness, you're certainly encouraged to do it. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. I think that it's good information and it has resources attached to it. So that's always good for planning, and just thinking about it helps all of us plan to know what to do, whether we complete the workshop or the worksheet or not.
Yes, ma'am. Thank
It's a
you.
good thing. Any questions or comments from
Thanks,
other
Randy.
council?
I have a question and a comment. Did your wife take your shoes yet? If not, we're going to let her know.
I think she has not watched these meetings over the last 24 years, ma'am. So I don't think
Okay,
she's
we'll
caught on to that yet.
we'll send a messenger.
Oh,
over.
that's fair play. That's
But the second thing, just thinking about Loma Prieta in 89, it
Yes.
was 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Set a timer and think about standing there 20 seconds and the damage that happened in 20 seconds.
Yeah.
20 seconds seemed like eternity then. And what if you had one that was longer? I hazard to even think about that. So thank you for the reminder.
that's a really great reminder. You know, ma'am, I'm thinking back in my personal life to the Northridge earthquake. I was living in city of San Buenaventura, which is very close to the center of that, and I had a 1-year-old child in another room that I had to run down the hallway to grab and pull out of a crib and find a spot in a doorway at the time, because that's what we were taught back then, to stay still. And it, just like you said, it felt like forever, getting bounced around in a wood frame house that was shaky.
And it was very hard to walk because
Oh, yeah.
everything was moving.
Yes,
I
yes.
was hanging on to another person in a doorway and we were almost falling over.
Yeah.
It was really hard.
That's great to hear that we have these personal experiences. Hopefully people will learn from that and try not to put themselves in that situation.
Well, thank you very much. That will move us on to the consent calendar.
Madam Mayor, if I could make a quick comment on
Please.
item H, there is a slight typo that I wanted to acknowledge. It's in the title of the item, and it's also cited once in the staff report itself. It should state November 1st, 2024, not November 1st, 2025. Sorry for that.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad we don't have to wait an extra year for that. So item D has been pulled again for edits. Okay. And then the correction on item 8 was given. And can I get in a first and a second to adopt consent calendar items E through G and I through J?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor, roll call, please.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Davis.
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz.
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin.
Aye.
And Mayor O'Connell.
Aye. Thank you. That brings us
And then,
to,
Madam Mayor, also item H with the amendment.
Yeah, make a motion
Yes.
to approve item H with November 1st, 2024.
Second.
roll call, please.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Davis.
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz.
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin.
Aye.
And Mayor O'Connell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to old business, item K, the city council consideration of RBA zoning district issues, including protection of city-owned open space, public street standards, and related development standards. I will say that when I reviewed the agenda, I asked that this item be moved forward in front of the other two items we're discussing, because I thought it'd be better to get it out of the way before we made a resolution to change the zoning maps, or didn't, before we discuss that, so that any of those issues could be discussed and questions to the community answered. So with that, we can go ahead and get the staff report, please.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. Prior to and during the last public hearing in September on the RZ 1 2024, a number of issues were raised that were really not related to the ordinance pertaining to the RBA zone, other citywide issues. And so for clarity, we decided to pull those out from the RZ case discussion. That's why it's being presented as a separate item. So I'll just kind of list through some of the items that we had discussed and there were inquiries about. One is sort of mechanisms for protection of city-owned open space lots in the acres. There's a memo from City Legal Counsel that lays out these options in some detail. It's going to quickly summarize the options at the hearing here. And if you have more questions, certainly City Council or City Legal Counsel can elaborate. The first is the kind of current condition that in 2019, the council did approve a declaration of restrictions on the open space lots owned by the city. That declaration is in the process of being recorded. And once recorded, it can only be released by a unanimous vote of the city council. So that's kind of the current status of protection of those particular lots. And there's some other options that are laid out, again, by legal counsel. One was conveying a conservation easement to on those properties to a land trust or other nonprofit. Alternative to that would be conveying the property in fee, or actually turning over the ownership to a similar land trust or similar group. Another option was changing the general plan land use designation and zoning to reflect open space on those particular parcels. Given the configuration of the lots, the legal counsel is not recommending that particular strategy due to concerns if any privately held lots are involved in those zoning districts or GP designation. It does present a potential takings issue for the city and liability for the city. So that was one of the kind of key issues. I know if you want to, we can either go through all the items and take questions at the end, whatever the council's pleasure is, or I can, if you want to have questions on that particular component, it's totally up to you.
Would you rather wait until we're finished and ask all our questions at that time?
I'm fine. Yeah, I don't have any questions in regards to this.
I have a question that might get lost if we don't ask it now. John, knowing that some of the ways we can protect the acres in this first go-round is that it would take a vote of the entire city council moving forward to overturn it. Can you explain that a little bit better for the public, please?
I'll probably defer to legal counsel. Michael, you want to?
Thanks, Michael.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham, sure. What the Declaration of Restrictions provides is that the city-owned properties, which are roughly 45 to 47 properties at the moment, have to be used for open space and habitat preservation. And that's the restrictions that will be put on those properties, and they cannot be used for any other purpose. The issue is that certainly a future council could decide to remove those restrictions by terminating the Declaration of Restrictions. But in order to do that, the declaration provides specifically that it would take a unanimous vote of the city council to do that. The idea being that the council who approved the Declaration of Restrictions certainly wanted to make it extremely difficult to get rid of those restrictions. In addition, some of those properties were purchased through state or federal funding. And with respect to those parcels, and I think there's roughly 10 or 12 of those, those could not be used, those could not be disposed of for any purpose other than open space and habitat preservation without also going to the state or federal agency that provided the money, and they would have to agree to that as well. Clearly, that would be a very, very difficult hill to climb. So the idea is that both the declaration of restrictions and the restrictions that have been put on some of the properties by state and federal agencies make it would be an extremely difficult situation for those properties to be used for anything other than open space and habitat preservation.
So just one more point, Michael, if you don't mind. Just to be sure, this is about as good as we can get it for protections at this point with this council who is sitting here right now.
Correct. I mean, again, the legal memo does talk about two other options. For example, if you could put in a conservation easement on the property or transferring the property in fee to a nonprofit organization, that might provide, it would be belt and suspenders to what you have right now, and there would also be a cost involved in either the conservation easement or transferring the property in fee, because the organization that would hold the easement or that would hold the property in fee would want to make sure that there was a funding source so that it could make sure that its fiduciary duties to guard that property for open space and preservation of habitat, they would have the money to make sure that happened year in and year out.
Thank you, Michael.
So I do have one follow-up question. On the paperwork you gave us on page 68 of our packet, it does have the signed declaration, but it is not dated. Is that a problem?
I don't believe it is a problem. It was approved by council back in 2019. When we get ready to record this document, we will put in the date that the council approved it. It will be signed by the mayor, and then we will record it.
But this document was signed by the mayor.
Then we can simply.
But we didn't never record it. Is that the case?
Yeah, the reason it hasn't been recorded is because we have roughly 50 legal descriptions that need to be attached to this document so that because the recorder won't record a document without a legal description, and we have 50 properties involved. And we've been assembling, trying to find all the various deeds, so we have all the legal descriptions. The clerk's office pretty much has that done now, and we'd anticipate recording this before the end of the year.
Okay, but the declaration was executed by the city as of blank day on blank 2019. So
we will insert the date that the council approved it, which I think was in October of 2019, if I recall correctly.
Okay, I just wasn't sure that you could put in a date after it was already signed, or if we needed to do this over again.
No, I think it's just a clerical oversight that the date wasn't put in at that time.
Okay. That's the only questions I have on this portion, so we'll let you keep going.
Excuse me, I have some questions.
Sure. Oh, I'm sorry.
Michael, I actually went back to 2016. You appeared before Open Space and Ecology Committee, and you gave pretty much same sort of presentation as appears in our staff report. And it was interesting to me that that night, your recommendation unequivocally to OSEC was for the city to go with a conservation easement rather than the declaration of restrictions, which surprised me that the council in 2019 chose the declaration of restrictions. But reading through the material further, I was intrigued by the whole idea of rezoning and wondered why rezoning would have to happen to all those properties within the priority preservation area. Why wouldn't it just apply, or couldn't it apply only to properties under city ownership?
I think the issue you run into there is that it's more than just zoning. There's also a general plan designation. Your zoning needs to be consistent with the general plan. And so it would be somewhat problematic to have a general plan land use designation on basically a checkerboard situation in the acres in order to make the zoning be consistent with that. So I think the idea is that it would be spot zoning if you were to do it on a zoning basis, but I think the larger problem is the general plan designation, and you have to sort of do all or none in terms of the land use designation because of the general plan situation. So I think that's the problem, and that you can't just pick and choose individual parcels to designate under your general plan as open space and the parcel next to it be residential. General plans typically don't work that way.
I completely understand what you're saying. I wholeheartedly agree, except for two facts. We have areas around the ridge that are zoned open space. And they're right next to residential parcels, individual residential parcels. The same thing exists in the acres. There are two giant swaths of city-owned properties, or I should say designated city properties. And then there are some parcels around them. It would be very easy to zone those two large areas, much like the ridge, as open space. We don't have to get into all the individual parcels if we just draw a line around those two areas and say, much like the ridge, this is open space.
I don't disagree with that at all. That if you have blocks of parcels that you could reasonably call out or cull out as open space, you could do that. It's just the reality of it is that it doesn't necessarily provide any more protection than your declaration of restrictions, because a future council certainly could decide to change the general plan and or the zoning for those parcels the same way that it theoretically could set aside the declaration of restrictions. If there's, so it could be done. I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but it just depends on, how much area you want to have that isn't going to end up with a checkerboard kind of situation.
Well, the one differentiation I see is that when we talk about conservation easements, it raised the question you had brought up in 2016 before OSEC, that usually it involves the grantor. I hope I'm using the right designation. Grantors will typically set up an endowment fund to fund the ongoing responsibility to look after the property, give easement holder using interest from the fund to look after the property. So
Correct.
then the person that gets the easement is responsible for the maintenance, which we anticipate a certain level of that. But with zoning, we don't get into that.
No, but you still have the maintenance responsibility falling on someone's shoulders, and it's been the city so far. So the zoning doesn't really change the obligation to maintain the property for habitat and open space.
But typically, though, the zoning changes, from my experience on the Planning Commission, you make zoning changes, they are also reflected in the general plan. As opposed to when we have this declaration of restrictions, that is not the case.
Well, again, your zoning has to follow the general plan, not the other way around. It is true that if it was zoned, general planned and zoned open space, uses have to be consistent with that. Substantively, that's no different than what their declaration of restrictions say, because it also says it can only be used for open space and habitat preservation. So I'm not disagreeing that if you could logically create areas that would be general planned open space and then zoned similarly, that would be belts and suspenders. but it isn't really going to give you much more protection or any more protection than what your declaration of restrictions already do.
I think it's a matter of perception and semantics in that if we weren't worried about open space around the ridge, there could have been a declaration of restrictions there, and we chose to zone it open space for a reason. And I think the intent all along, we go back historically with Trust for Public Land, all the entities that deeded properties to the city purchasing properties, the perceptions of the residents, open space, have always been that this would be zoned open space, and we've never done that. That's the distinction that I think we have not followed through, and we've let down our residents.
Council can certainly give direction to staff to take a look at whether or not certain areas of the ridge could be general planned and zoned for open space as to the city-owned parcels. Without looking more specifically at the map in terms of where those blocks of city parcels are, I don't know the answer to that, but we could certainly do that if council gives direction for the staff to do that.
Thank you.
Anything else from council members for staff questions at this time?
Yeah, thank you for your questions, Colin. Yeah, so it's kind of, stimulating my brain to ask some questions. So, Michael, the intent of the councils that have purchased the properties and the public's perception of purchasing these properties as open space to be protected as open space in perpetuity seems to be, what everyone feels is, should be what occurs, right? And you're right about, you have these two options here, and they both seem the same. But there is that, I don't know, I guess if there's a distinction where it says open space rather than, having a declaration recorded, it doesn't have the same weight. So, but my concern though, in reading, doing the zoning is the legal one. And so I hear what you're saying about the checkerboard. If, there's a particular lot that is completely surrounded by land that the city owns, if we made that a zone that was just open space, is there a possibility of putting the city in legal jeopardy of taking away someone's rights?
The answer, Councilmember Lentz, is yes, because if the city takes action to essentially deprive a property owner of all economic use of the property, and most property owners would argue that my property being designated to be used only for open space does that, the city could potentially receive a claim for what's called a takings. And if that were found to be the case, the city would then have to pay the property owner for the fair market value of that parcel.
And then if, say the city used the declaration for some lots, say lots that abutted private property, and the other lots that we own that do not have that border, could we then have those lots then be zoned as open space? So we would actually kind of be doing both. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think if you want the most protection, you have the declaration of restrictions applied to all the city-owned properties that have an open space and habitat preservation purpose. To the extent that you can sort of logically and consistent with land use practices come up with a general plan designation that would apply only to the city-owned properties without jeopardizing other privately owned properties, that could be done. We would just have to take a look at what that would look like practically and make sure it didn't create some sort of odd checkerboard effect up there. I think if if you have demarcation lines where you've got 10 city parcels that could be open space next to, the rest of the acres, that could probably be done. It's just that, typically general plans are large in nature, not real small, but we could look at trying to craft something that the council would find acceptable.
All right, thank you. And then, Madam Mayor, I know that we're not in discussion, but Colleen, is that what you were kind of getting at, doing some kind of hybrid?
Well, I would like if our city clerk would put up attachment 4 for everyone to see in the staff report.
That's the roads
It's,
section.
it's the roads. So I would just simply call to your attention, 2019 was a while ago. If we were going to get a lawsuit about a declaration of restrictions and it's virtually similar to zoning, I would think we would have had a lawsuit already. I think that in the 2 decades, these acres properties have been purchased and acquired and deeded to the city. Everybody knows it. And I think that's common knowledge. Plus, if we look at this map, there's one property over towards the left. You see a road that says Arthur Road. There's one property that's kind of surrounded. The rest of them are not. So that's really not an issue here.
So it's my understanding, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that the paper roads, people with, let's say the property, and I want to point to my screen, but the one that looks landlocked, is currently landlocked, but it has a paper road going to it. And even with the declaration, this restrictions on our properties, they have that access to that easement if they were to want to build that road out. That property owner still has the right to build that paper road out. Is that correct?
If they can achieve the requirement for access, yes, but they would have to provide public
So-
access to that road or to that lot.
Okay, so the paper roads, even though they're paper roads, they are still an easement across that roadway to access that lot if someone wants to put the money in it.
I think we're getting maybe, the requirement on the code is for a public road, not building a private road across an
No,
easement. So someone would have to actually,
but there's an easement available for them to.
there's not, I wouldn't, unless you looked at the title report of all these lots, you'd have to determine who has access rights on various private easements. I can't say that every lot out there has a easement across those paper streets. I just don't have I don't have the documentation to prove that, to state that's a fact.
Okay.
So,
And I think part of this is getting into the next discussion, questions for staff on this. And I think one of the questions I had for staff was, rather than, and again, it has to do with this issue, but with the next item. And if it's too far afield for this issue, we can discuss it in the next one. But when we're doing this zoning, thinking about doing a zoning overlay to make it Brisbane Acres Residential 2, can we not put that over our city-owned parcels? Exactly.
You don't want to zone this, you don't want to put it over the city-owned parcels? You want to,
Correct. That would be my hope, that we wouldn't make it any more conducive to a future council to allow for development if we didn't have this upzoning. And by not upzoning our own property, we would not be risking a lawsuit from ourselves. And the properties that are in other people's hands, where we didn't have the state ire coming down on us for not making them RBA 2, because they're our own open for designated open space properties, we don't need to put that zoning overlay over them or the change of zoning.
Well, at the risk of mixing the two items, I'd remind the council that the overlay has no bearing on SB 9. SB 9 applies to all properties in the zoning district. The overlay is only to add some additional development standards. So the whole zoning district, if it went away, if the council chose not to adopt it, SB 9 still applies to all residentially zoned properties. And
But
again,
only if they have existing infrastructure.
yes, it is
So
no different than
none of these would really apply at this moment.
that would be the case in the zoning, the RZ zone. The overlay has no different, makes no difference to any of that, but that's your option. But it makes no difference in terms of SB 9 applies, and if they meet the criteria, and again, you're the property owner, so you or your future occupants of those seats, and they would have to be the ones to apply for this zone, any kind of SB 9 right, or any development right, again, which is getting back to Michael's point about why the declaration of restriction is being imposed on lots bought for open space purpose.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to go too far afield. Sure, please, Colleen.
Does SB 9 apply to publicly owned parcels?
SB 9 applies to zoning districts.
But it doesn't differentiate between publicly and privately owned parcels?
It does not.
So
Correct.
you
That-
would have to put a zoning overlay over City Hall or anything and everything? Essentially, because then.
City
you've
Hall
got
isn't zoned
no-
for residential use.
But neither would if something is zoned where it's open space. So the logic escapes me here.
Well, the parcels right now are not zoned open space. They're zoned residential. And I think John's point is that the overlay district is simply putting certain other standards on what is already there. If you did not adopt the overlay, the SB 9 provisions of state law are still going to apply to those residentially zoned properties. Regardless with respect to the city-owned properties, whether they're zoned residential or zoned whatever, you also are going to have the declaration of restrictions on the city-owned properties, which give you more protection than probably any general plan or zoning would ever do. I understand the public perception of it, but from a legal point of view, the declaration of restrictions is about as protective and restrictive as you could get.
I think we're missing the question in that the city owns many different properties. We own the community park, we own Mission Blue, we own the library, the old library, City Hall. If we have an SB 9 zoning overlay on public property, it should be over all public property. So the point that's being made here is if in fact those acres properties under jurisdiction of the city, which makes them public property, what our Madam Mayor was asking is, would that SB 9 overlay be appropriate to put over those? Because they are public property. They are not private property. Is that?
Well, I mean, I guess if you're asking, could you come up with a situation where the overlay would only apply to privately owned properties and not city-owned properties? It starts to look like spot overlay zoning, which the law doesn't really encourage. I guess I'm not sure what what is the upside of, or why not, what's the downside, I guess, of not having the overlay district apply to all the properties in this area? There doesn't seem to be any downside to not doing it that way.
I think, Michael, it's just more of an esoteric question of why would it apply on city-owned properties on the acres if it doesn't apply to city-owned properties somewhere else?
Through the
Well,
chair,
Yeah.
the SB 9 applies to residentially zoned property. So if property that's owned by the city is on Visitation Avenue, that's not R1 zoned. The community park is not R1 zoned. So it only applies to properties that are zoned residentially.
Okay, so that's where you're taking it to the RBA.
Yes.
Okay, but if these acres, city jurisdiction properties were zoned differently,
Then you're back to the question if the city wants to initiate a zoning case to rezone and amend the general plan on city-owned property, and it were perfected, then SB 9 would not apply.
okay, that's the answer to the question.
So one other question I have, and I just drew some heavy lines on city-owned parcel map exhibit. Right now, the RBA zoning overlay to protect it to some of the standards for what we're going to be doing in the next item is following the priority conservation lines. To a certain degree. But if we modified the overlay, and I could show you what I drew, it wouldn't be piecemeal. And it would only be carving out city-owned properties. The only exception to making it piecemeal would be the one property that is up there at the end of Arthur Road.
Ingrid, could you change the exhibit, please? We have one that shows the city-owned property. Just so again, everyone's clear, the overlay as proposed applies to the entirety of the R1 zone and the entirety of the RBA zone. So that is the limits of the proposed overlay zone. Not the PPA, or the PPA line doesn't have anything to do with the zoning overlay.
It's one way, the difference between the declaration of restrictions and zoning. With the zoning, you don't overlay it. With the declaration, you do. That is the difference.
So it would seem, and I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear, and I'm not quite sure how to do that in this setting without going into the other item that we're going to be discussing. So,
Can we hold this and go to the other one and then come back to this, or is that not allowed?
Michael, I'm looking at you.
Sure, you can certainly continue this until you have or tie it in with the discussion that'll follow in L. I just didn't know whether or not you wanted to get through the other issues under K before you moved on to L,
I think-
because there may be some relationship between what you've been discussing now and some of the other items in K. But you can
Good.
certainly continue the whole item, move to L, or combine the two, whatever the council's pleasure is.
okay, I think that we should finish the staff questions with item K and perhaps hear from the public, and then we can wait on any decisions on K until we've heard about the other one, if that works for the council. So please go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. So the other item, and Ingrid, if you could put up the other map, there were questions about the limits of public roads and, no, the first one. Yeah, that one. So again, we've mapped on this exhibit the limits of public streets, which are in white, other sorts of private roads or private easements, which are hatched in red, and then the quote-unquote paper streets, which are shown in yellow or gold, depending on how your exhibit shows. So again, this is just informational for the council in response to inquiries that you had at the last meeting. Then the related item with, again, street requirements, and again, we've reiterated in here what we discussed previously about the requirements for a development in the acres to have access to a public street and a 20-foot wide minimum clear roadway. So again, those are requirements that are imposed for any development that would occur in the acres going forward. So those were the acres-related issues that we had. And then the last issue that came up was a question of solar shading and concern over the need for a solar protection ordinance. If that's something the council wants to pursue, we'd recommend you direct staff to initiate that. That'll be somewhat challenging in Brisbane because of small lot sizes, terrain, topography, but if that's the council's directive, we are glad to look at that if that's what you wish. So that concludes my comments on item K.
So does council have any questions on this? Please, Karen.
Okay, so I understand that because of our lot sizes, that the solar conversation is very difficult. We already have situations in Brisbane where somebody has gone to great lengths to put solar on their roof and try and electrify their house, et cetera, only to have a neighbor build right next to them, 5 feet away from the fence, much taller building, and block their solar for the most part, taking their solar efficiency down to 25-30% from 100. And I know it's a very difficult thing for us to even think about because there are no rights given the new laws that the state has foisted upon us. But I think we should at least look at it and think about, even if we can't have laws in place that help, at least have conversations in place that might help people design so they're not destroying what their next door neighbor may have put in at their own great expense. Changing my roof costs $25,000 plus the solar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If my neighbor now turns around and blocks my solar, what do I have? So I think we should at least make a good faith effort of having a look at the possibility of conversations with people relative to these egregious laws that have been passed by the state.
Through the chair, apologies, Councilmember Cunningham, I think we're still in questions on this, so just want to make sure that we continue with the question piece, and then I think we're going to take public comment, and then we'll go to L and come back. And we're bouncing around a little bit. But
Okay, any other questions for staff, please?
John, could we in fact address potential of grandfathering in homes with solar not being obscured by saying that it would need a design review, perhaps working something out with a potential developer or property owner to incorporate articulation and other methods to preserve the solar as much as possible?
Well, if the council ends up wanting to have a discussion or have staff do a more robust analysis of this issue, that's certainly the kind of thing that we can look at. You know, that would all have to be researched for sure.
I would like that.
And so on the streets and who the private public ownership of streets, and while we have this map that sort of shows the status they're in now, we really don't know if truly the streets that are paper streets have access easements.
That is correct. Or the extent of those easements, who might have easement rights over what looks like a paper street.
Okay. And that's something, Michael, that is not written in state law with the paper streets?
Right, most of those, what you would have to do, you would have to look at you would have to get a title report for any of the parcels and see what kind of easement rights they have to access the individual parcels. They're called paper streets, but more likely than not, there is some sort of easement that exists out there. But again, without getting, a title report to take a look at what easements exist and who has the right to use it, all we can look at is what we show as paper streets, and we don't really know who has the right to use those without further review of the title reports.
Okay, and does planning department know of any property owners who have looked into whether they have easement or access right on any of these paper streets in our previous history? Do we know?
I'm not aware of any applications have been filed on one of those lots that would theoretically be served by a paper street, that they've demonstrated easement rights. So I'm not aware of any applications.
Okay, thank you very much. So we will open, if we don't have any other questions, we'll go ahead and open it up to public comment. I do have one slip from Sherry Goodwin on this item. Sherry, would you like to come up?
I have a PowerPoint. I don't know if you can see it, but,
Pull down the mic for you.
Okay.
There you go.
and then how do I change it? The middle one? Okay. So basically, I wanted you to think about the danger of evacuation and building up there, how it would increase some of the fire danger and evacuation danger.
So this would really be on the
I don't know if I'm
next
speaking in the right category,
item, but
actually.
it probably doesn't matter. Please.
That's
go-
what I
go
thought.
ahead.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, let me just, okay. We've had a lot of fires in the acres. This one is from 2019. That looks familiar, I'm sure. Why worry about wildland-urban interface? And what is it? That's when building in wilderness areas increases the risk of wildfires. It increases the number of human-caused wildfires in these areas. And they're more likely to be destructive and harder to fight. This is from the National Academy of Sciences. This article in the Chronicle explains that over the past 3 years, wildfires have wiped out tens of thousands of homes in areas known as wildland-urban interface zones, which is what we would be creating with a lot of construction up in the acres. What if we have to evacuate from a fire? This is from the residents page, and this was voluntary in 2019. Kings, Trinity, Margaret, Paul, and San Mateo Lane. It could have very easily have become a mandatory evacuation. This is a picture of a fire truck coming down Margaret Street. How are people going to evacuate, and how can, especially people with mobility issues? I mean, these are the streets that we're talking about. This is an 8-foot fire truck that I saw at Day on the Park. And I was talking to a firefighter. I said, is this the kind of truck you would use on Kings or Humboldt if there was a fire? He said, yes, this is the truck. It's 8 feet. And you need a spotter to get down in many areas of the roads and guide the driver so he can maneuver on these streets. So, and then you've got people evacuating too. So what does this mean? Let's look at Paradise, a town that burned down completely. Vehicle gridlock was so bad, people just abandoned their cars and fled the flames. And people died, and one of the reasons was there were too few escape lanes for too many people on narrow, windy roads, which I think sounds very familiar. I think we already have a potentially dangerous situation with Brisbane's narrow, windy streets. Can you imagine 100 or 200 more vehicles trying to evacuate down Margaret, Beatrice, Kings, Humboldt, Trinity, San Mateo, and other streets? This is in front of my house. This is a garbage truck. You don't even have room for two-way traffic. If people were evacuating, they would just have to abandon their cars. This is Humboldt, where the other day I had to back up and move over. There could not be two-way traffic. Good luck. And then we have this area where there's trucks stuck at least once a week. And if homes are built up there, are they even going to be insurable? This is from the residents page. We have a resident asking, you know, will these homes be insurable? People are losing insurance all over California. So I'm just, in summary, in my opinion, rezoning this area and tripling and quadrupling construction is a threat to the residents there. It increases fire risk. It increases danger while evacuating. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to speak? Please, Paul.
Thank you, Council. And thanks for the effort you put forward to try to come up with a plan to protect the acres. There's a couple things that I'd like to, what I heard tonight from Council regarding the acres, and that it could be difficult to have to, you know, approach the agencies that gave the money for the matching money for the properties, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Coastal Conservancy, when in fact they already have an allowance to pay back the money. And like Michael said, it would take a unanimous vote by a council to want to have a development up in the acres. So it's obvious that a full council could say, yeah, we want to have a development. We want to have a southeast ridge. And then the Coastal Conservancy and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has said, pay us back the money we gave you and you could do what you want with the property. And I would agree with your assessment of the properties that they are more contiguous than not as far as the habitat. And it is valuable habitat, and that's why it was purchased, or that was the intentions initially, to purchase the properties to protect them. And when you look at the map, and it shows the Brisbane residential district, but that other map that shows the city-owned parcels in a gray shaded pattern, and then you have the open space little sliver all the way out there that says open space and green. So why can't all the city-owned properties, because they're not planned for development or housing like other parcels, and the people that own those other parcels that are private, you know, like you said, they're still entitled to build on their property. There's nothing that the city's done to inhibit them from doing what they need to do on their properties. But, you know, as most people understand, and this is why most of those properties haven't been developed, is because only a developer can really come in and bring the infrastructure in to support development. So open space, like we know, we have lots of open space, whether it's the Crocker Trail or the Shanky Bakery properties that were purchased that were open space. Open space just means public property. So, you know, we don't want to turn it over to the park because the park one day could do something like what they want to do with it. It's public property. It's open space. San Mateo County could turn around and develop the acres if it was turned into the park. And I've heard people say, let's just turn it to the park or have a conservation easement. And I would like to know if there is a new distinction for conservation easements, because it's my understanding that a conservation easement had to have a previous use. And like dairy or ranching or logging or some type of use in the past. So I don't think a conservation easement applies. But with that said, and I want to thank you all for moving forward with going in and taking the deeds and, you know, really looking at how the deeds are, how they're, how they're stated, because open space, like I said, just means public property. And unfortunately, there is one thing that looms over all this with the issue with the acres is the fact that it's still a council could change the distinction. You can, you know, 5 of you can say, yeah, we want to have a developer come in because we need other amenities in this town. And that's how it usually works. So I thank you for the work you put forward, and I look forward to the outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak? Yeah, if not, we'll go to the people online. And I see Peter Sutherland has his hand raised. We will unmute you, and please go ahead, Peter.
Peter, can you go ahead and unmute?
Honorable council members, honorable mayor, thank you for your time. At the last meeting, I asked several questions, one of which was if somebody could research and find out what the status and ownership of the easement for Beatrice was specifically. And it sounds like there's a general lack of knowledge about who has easements, which makes it all sound very confusing for having open space and city-owned properties and not knowing if people can build streets on those in the future, which of course would certainly have a serious effect on open space and wildlife habitat. So I'm wondering, having formerly been in real estate lending, why it's such a big deal to get title reports and make these determinations for things that are so important. And I'm wondering if anybody came up with an answer about who owns the easement on Beatrice, because that particular thing also brings me to other questions, which is who's responsible, since Beatrice bisects the acres, the upper and lower, pretty much consistently. Who has to put up things like retaining walls, who has to put up things like safety corridors in order to protect any future development on the lower acres. If the city owns the upper acres, who's responsible for all that? And how does that affect city budgets? As we all know, these retaining walls can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for several hundred yards. And so I'm wondering if anybody has an answer for that, because I did ask that question last time and also asked that of the city manager. If anybody knows the answer to any of those several questions I just asked.
Great, thank you, Peter. We will see if we can delve into that and get a legal response as we go forward. Thank you. So is there anyone else online who'd like to speak?
No, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. So we will move on to the next item, and come back to this topic after we have heard item L.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. Item L has been continued a number of times. I think we discussed the basic parameters. The only issue that was new at the last council meeting was the question of, there are some requirements for notification of adjacent and nearby property owners of SB 9 developments, and when that might occur. There's the staff report lays out different options in terms of when that might happen. Staff believes it is most appropriate to do it upon approval of a building permit, because that's most timely in terms of when the development would actually occur. But if the council wants to require that notification earlier in the process, that's your prerogative, and the ordinance could be modified at your discretion. So with that, staff is recommending the introduction of ordinance for approval of rezoning RZ1 2024.
Okay. Council questions for staff?
I do not.
Karen,
No, sorry.
I have one, please.
please, Colleen.
John, in the staff report on page 100, second paragraph says, one such qualifying criteria is that the lot may not have endangered species habitat. The RBA district as a whole is within San Bruno Mountain Habitat Conservation Plan area. And a number of the properties, especially in the upper reaches of the district, are likely to contain habitat for endangered butterfly species and therefore would be excluded. If I owned one of the privately owned acres properties, how would I know if all of that area is in the Habitat Conservation Plan? If I wanted to develop one of those parcels that I owned, how would I know if it qualifies or not?
Currently and in the future, any development in the acres, if an applicant is going to propose a property, all the properties are within the HCP. They're all obligated to have a biological survey performed, specifically to look for butterfly habitat. And those surveys are performed, the applicant or the developer pays for it, but the city has an on-call list of qualified consultants who prepare these studies. They're prepared under contract to the city. And then the results of that will drive whether or not there's, or determine whether or not there's habitat on those sites.
And knowing that identifying habitat can often be difficult because you need to do that at certain times of year. If I'm a parcel owner and I'm required to do this, is it done specifically at a certain time of year in order to get fairly verifiable results?
Yes,
So it might delay my project, in fact, because I have to wait for the proper time of year.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to ask a follow-up on that. If a property has habitat on it, is it completely excluded, if it's determined to have habitat? Is it excluded from SB 9
Yes,
categorically?
yes.
It wouldn't exclude it from regular development because they could apply for a take permit.
They could, yes, they could get approval. There are provisions under the HCP to allow for that. So yes, they could do their standard development potentially, if they can mitigate it. They would have to do mitigation presumably for that take.
Well, most people just throw a little money at it and go ahead and do what they want to do, but, okay. Any other questions?
Oddball follow-up to your question. So if there's found to be habitat on a parcel, SB 9 doesn't apply, but the owner can apply for a take to build what they want to build. So if they're given the take, does SB 9 then come back into play because they're going to build?
No, it would be whatever their rights are under the current HCP in terms of can they mitigate their take on, by whatever means, off-site, on-site, and still allow them to build. That would be site by site, but it'd only be for that one unit permitted under the current zoning, not SB 9.
Thank you, John.
And then I have another question for you, and I think I'm going to pass this among my council for a moment, and then I would like to have the clerk walk this over to you and see if it's possible for this overlay, or what the effect of an overlay that looks more like what I've drawn would have on what we're doing here and protecting the existing city-owned properties. And if you just sort of look at where I've made my dark lines
Yeah.
around
I
to change the borders.
I see where you've made those lines. There's one parcel in the middle that we're going to have to
Somehow, I
ask
don't know how
question
that would
about.
work.
Ask a question about. This one.
Yeah, that's the only holdout.
Yeah. Checkerboard zoning.
It'd be, well,
One
that,
parcel.
one parcel would be checkerboarded.
Madam Mayor, may I ask a question regarding that parcel? I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the one down here in the corner.
Yep.
Even without SB 9, that parcel would face the same challenges to be developed, with or without SB 9, with or without any zoning. It would face the exact same challenges because it has a paper road, Arthur Road, and Brisbane Municipal Code in the staff report says you cannot have private roads anymore. So going forward, it would have to be a municipal road to that one property. Nothing is different about that tonight or the way it is today. It's all the same. They would have the same access challenges.
SB 9 doesn't apply to that lot. It never did. It's because there's no infrastructure to it.
Exactly. That's what I'm
So-
saying. There's nothing
Yeah,
that
zero,
changes.
Habitat value. It still would be,
You are absolutely
prohibited
correct.
from SB 9.
You are absolutely correct.
But we are also zoning
Zoning.
in anticipation of SB 9 applying. And that's why we're putting the overlay over, to make sure that it complies with SB 9. And if it doesn't apply to it, it wouldn't be a take if we didn't put the overlay over it. So I'm going to, again, ask the clerk to take this over to John to see what I've drawn, if I may. And just get a random opinion if this is a feasible way to draw a line that isn't a checkerboard. If I had a Sharpie, it'd come out better, but I didn't have a Sharpie.
Well, as you already saw, Madam Mayor, you have that one parcel that's an out parcel. So, it would be the same issue to the city attorney. We would have a donut hole with that one particular parcel, and what the risk is of the city of doing that. And, again, I have to defer to legal counsel on that, but, it's certainly from a zoning standpoint, those are two blocks that I think are, from a general plan standpoint, excluding that little donut hole would be a reasonable general plan area, I believe, and zoning district, other than that one parcel, so.
So the only thing that this overlay does is gives us a little more control on someone who wants to build on one of the non-city owned properties. And this just wouldn't give that extra bit of control, but because SB 9 doesn't apply to that piece of property anyway, it wouldn't be changing anything and it shouldn't be putting us at a liability.
So as long as Michael's okay with the overlay splitting the district, or if there need to be some
I'm not
particular.
sure Michael's seen my drawing.
I have not, but I.
He can visualize it, I believe, yeah.
When it was put on earlier, I think you're talking about the parcel that's kind of at the end of Beatrice?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Arthur, yeah.
Yeah, I think you could draw the line, whether you include that parcel or not. If that parcel's not part of the overlay, it would still have the R1 development rights. It would still have what I'll call SB 9 development rights. It just wouldn't have the city's SB 9 fine tuning of SB 9 on it. So I think that's the way I would look at it. It is still going to be able to utilize SB 9 with or without
if it
the overlay
applies.
district.
If it applies.
Yeah.
If it applies, exactly. And if it can be developed for all the reasons that council has mentioned previously. But I think you could draw the line including it or excluding it, I guess I should say, from the overlay district. It's just that it wouldn't eliminate SB 9 development rights, assuming SB 9 applies to the property and all the other infrastructure related issues could be met.
Okay. And when the public asked about the private roads, and while I know we have not done, or I assume that we have not done heavy duty lifting to find out who has easement rights, any costs to put retaining walls or whatever infrastructure needs to go in to build the roads would be on the person who is developing a property on that road. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so there would be no liability to the city. And
well, just one second. The answer is yes, to a certain extent. And the reason I say that is that because that if a property owner, in order to develop, has to acquire property that it doesn't own, then that property owner is required to attempt to acquire it. But if it doesn't, then either the city has to acquire that property or the property owner doesn't have to acquire it. So it gets, it gets a little tricky in terms of what the property owner's obligations are in terms of acquiring additional parcels, additional property to get to a public road. But with respect to things like retaining walls and things of that nature, yes, that is the obligation of the property owner, but the acquisition of property to get from point A to a public road, it can be, it's not clearly black and white all the time, is what I'm saying.
so, but if I'm looking at this Beatrice and Arthur that snakes around and comes back up to a property, that property owner could not force the city to allow a straight line access from their property or where they want their road to end down to the most local public street.
Correct. They would have to use whatever existing easements are there, whether they're express or implied. They couldn't say, we want to go on a straight line from X or point A to point B. They would have to use whatever might be available to them of record, or what could be what's called, an implied easement.
Okay, and then they would need to bring it to city engineer standards before the plan would be approved for that road, and before any, and building the actual road to city standards would be on them.
That is correct.
Okay. Have you had a chance to look at that a little bit more closely, John? Or do you have a need to ask any question?
On
in
the overlay,
regards-
you are the revision you're suggesting?
Yes.
Yeah, look fine to me.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from council?
I have one question. And John, it's a question that I asked at our last hearing in regards to this, and that's infrastructure. So just to be clear, if a property doesn't currently have infrastructure going to it, then they are prohibited for applying for SB9, correct?
Well, if they were to provide the infrastructure, then they'd be eligible.
Okay,
It's
but
not fixed in time. They would have to pay for all that improvement.
so they couldn't say, hey, I want to apply for SB9 and I'll do the infrastructure later.
No.
Okay, just being real clear about that. All right, thank you.
Madison, do you have any questions?
No.
Thank you. Okay, we'll open it up for public comments. And I don't have any slips yet, but there are any members of the public who would like to speak, or are there any members of the public? Maybe, is there a way to put my little hand-drawn map up for the public so they can sort of see where my thought process was? Or maybe somebody could outline it with a Sharpie?
Give us a minute, we can do that.
Okay, why don't we take a 5-minute break, and then we can come back to that. I don't.
run to the next.
Great, thank you. Welcome back. Thanks for the bearing with us for a minute. So staff has looked at this and we put it up on the wall, and sorry for my artistic inabilities. But I was thinking, my question to staff is if we could make the overlay exclude the areas that are in blue and carved out the way that I've drawn them. And they're giving me sort of the nod of, yes, we could do it that way, so that we wouldn't be adding, if we decide to approve the overlay, we wouldn't necessarily be adding the overlay on the city-owned properties, just on the non-city-owned properties. And then that may create an issue, I would assume, later on, if we acquire other properties, they would already have the overlay. But I guess that'd be something to look at down the road if we were to change that. Are there any other questions for staff at this time?
Madam Mayor, just on that point, if there were subsequent properties purchased, that declaration of restrictions that we've been talking about does provide that declaration would apply to those properties as well.
Great. Okay. And since this is new information, is there any members of the public that would like to speak on this portion of what was brought up as new information? Seeing no one in the audience, do we have anyone online? Okay, so I guess we'll close the public hearing and move on to discussion. any thought process on,
Madam Mayor, we'll need a motion.
excuse me?
Do we need a motion to close the public hearing?
Oh, do we need a motion? Can we get a motion to,
Second.
all those in favor, roll call?
Councilmember Cunningham?
Aye.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz?
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin?
Aye.
And Mayor O'Connell.
Aye, thank you. Okay, discussion. Thoughts on my revised overlay and if we even want to move forward with this? I mean, what do we want to do?
Yeah, I think what you've put forth, if it passes the legal muster, then I think we should just do it, right? I mean, in the end, SB 9 is the law, so.
Well, this changes where the overlay would go, but it doesn't change what the overlay is and whether we want to move forward with that. So, in my opinion, the overlay does give us a little bit more protection than not having the overlay, because SB 9 is the law of the land, whether we like it or not. We have heard from the public about, safety issues and concerns that, some big development's going to go there, and I think that go up in the acres. And I don't think that's anyone's intentions of what will happen, but we do want to protect as much as we can from, overzealous building. But again, that is this council. So any comments or direction?
I think, I also think this is about as good as we can get it, given that the rest of it is out of our control. It definitely gives us some wiggle room. And if I thought we could do better, I would say so.
Okay.
So I have the question regarding zoning, whether we stay with our declaration of restrictions or actually do the zoning. And for uniformity, since the Ridge has open space, I would be more in favor of the zoning, and I think it sends a better message to our residents who've asked for this for at least, I think, about 15 years. If it accomplishes the same thing, why wouldn't we do that?
So that brings a question of, is open space designation just mean it's public property? Or does it mean that it, can forever and never be built on? Or you can change the zoning almost as easy as you can.
Well, in terms of changing the zoning or the general plan, that's subject to a majority vote by the council at some future time. But the general plan has some very defined open space being, land set aside as natural area. Primarily, it's not just public land. It does have typically definitions of wildlife value, habitat, et cetera, et cetera. So under the general plan, that's kind of how general open space is defined. If you were to zone it open space, there's just a very limited, virtually no land uses that are permitted in that particular zoning district.
And typically, if we were to zone it open space, we would have to exclude that one property that if we just, because, and that would be difficult because it would be a landlocked parcel to designate it as open space. But we could, even if we moved forward with this now, we could move forward in theory on changing the general plan to designate areas as open space, further down the road, but do this now with the deed restrictions and shoot for that higher bar perhaps as the council moves forward.
You could, as a separate motion, once you act on this, whatever you decide to do on this zoning case, if you want to direct staff to initiate a general plan amendment and rezoning, to apply open space designations and zoning to city-owned properties in the acres as practicable or legally acceptable or whatever, you can give us that direction and we'll come back with a separate case. Yes.
Okay. What's your feeling of that?
I'd be fine with that. I'll make the motion if you want.
Well,
I have a question.
Sure.
So
Madison, please.
if we did a change to our general plan, right, and we zone this as open space, would we not, we're still going to move forward with the declaration of restrictions simultaneously, or is that moot?
I would hope that what our motion would be to move forward with the individual parcels having the declaration of restrictions now as something we can do for protective purposes. We have it as a blanket, but that's not recorded on each deed. And so I would want us to move forward with that declaration and then also give staff direction to change the borders, if we can do that. And also to move forward with the planning department looking at changing the general plan and having an amendment to put those into open space to have a sort of a third layer of protection on them.
So, because the declaration of restrictions, right, can only be overturned unanimously, but
Correct.
a general plan change would be just majority.
Correct.
So as long as they're both there, I think it's like a double whammy, because I wouldn't want to go from something that's like more difficult to overturn to something that's easier to overturn just because the public likes that it's that it's being zoned as open space, because that sounds better, when in reality it's still easier to change.
Yes, and I agree with that.
Yeah, and then it seems like, and John.
Wait, hold on.
I'm sorry, Madison.
I wasn't done. So, and then if there's concern over that one parcel, I mean, we want to have these conversations with all of these property owners if we can about buying their property anyway. So if there's that, this adjustment and that one property owner is upset because they're landlocked in, kind of an open space zone and they feel like that's a taking, then maybe that's going to inspire that conversation that we want to have anyway about the city purchasing that property so we can have one contiguous area that the city owns. So I think that if anything, like, it would just inspire a conversation that we want to have.
And the way that it is right now, we wouldn't be down zoning that property. We would be, and we wouldn't be up zoning it. We would just be leaving it alone. It wouldn't have any, I believe it wouldn't have any legal ramifications on that property at this time. But maybe this conversation will have, would precipitate that property owner realizing it's going to be a really hard feat to get infrastructure and roadways, to the city standards to that property. So maybe it would instigate a conversation, but maybe not.
So, John, just so that I have clarification, so if we do the declaration of restrictions, that particular parcel, there's no taking, right? It's just, this is just we're just talking about the lots that we own. It has nothing to do with the zone as a whole. But if we did rezone it, that area is open space that we own, then there could be a legal challenge because it would be completely surrounded, right? And so,
Well, that's why I think if you do, initiate that case, we'd be having conversations with the city attorney about what can the boundaries of that district be that's legally defensible. We're not pinning down the boundaries of the open space district tonight. All we're asking for you to authorize us to study it, and we'll come back with you with the legal advice
Exactly.
as well.
So there could be some parcels that we own that make sense to designate in the general plan as open space, while others would just remain in the declaration of restrictions.
That could be. I mean, we won't know that. And I think any general plan amendment, and what we've seen is it takes a year or more to even get to a general plan change, because it couldn't be considered an emergency or anything like that. So it's going to take quite a bit of research, and I'm sure legal will weigh in.
And through the chair, if I could, I think the council knows that there's a tremendous amount of work that the Community Development Department is doing and will be doing over the course of the next period of time. So I appreciate the comments related to the timing.
Thank you. And I'm not pinning us down to a year either. I'm just saying it would be something way in the future.
Yes.
And that's what I meant, is like that general plan change.
Right.
Maybe could help us have a conversation with that parcel owner.
And are you done, Madison? Okay. And just for clarification, John, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Whether we do an overlay or we don't do an overlay, that particular parcel, if they want to develop it right now, they still have to provide infrastructure to that property. So
Yes.
if we do the overlay and we do everything else that we do, nothing changes for them. If they want to develop their property, they can.
That's correct.
But they have to provide correct infrastructure per our laws on the books today to get to that property, with or without us doing anything else.
Yes.
I just wanted to make that clarification for the public. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, if we make one more comment that I think might be germane to this conversation, as the council knows, on an annual basis, the city sends letters to all of the owners of Brisbane Acres properties. That I'm expecting this year's letters to be going out imminently. I also take that role responsibility. I take that role seriously as well for myself, and I do engage where I have the opportunity with individual property owners on a, I guess, more personal basis to see if there's some interest. And if that is the case, then I will come back to the council in the appropriate way to discuss what the engagement could look like.
Great, thank you. And just so the public's aware that those kind of conversations always have to be done in closed session because it's a property negotiation. So the public, it's not going to be out there on the public bulletin board. Just because people think that we hide stuff when we are in property negotiations, and that's not the case. Okay, so can I get a motion?
Yes, but what is it? A motion to move forward with the overlay as is in that last.
Introducing an ordinance approving a zoning text and map amendment here per the revised map.
I will make the motion to consider introducing an ordinance approving a zoning text and map amendment 2024 RZ1 overlay to residential R1 district, residential district, and the RBA Brisbane Acres residential district as per the map we just showed the public.
Second.
All those in favor, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Cunningham?
Aye.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz?
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin?
Aye.
Mayor O'Connell?
Aye. Thank you. And did we get enough clarification on item K as to what we wanted to do, or do we want to come back and discuss that?
I think we were mostly there. I think it's at the discretion of the council, but what I understood was, and per this conversation as well, direction to explore the the opportunities in a general plan amendment associated with making these properties open space. It also sounded to me, but if the council wished to discuss more, that you'd like us to go back and look at the solar issue.
Yes, I think we do want to, again, with the looking at what the general plan amendment could be, and I would add as a personal thing on the solar, while we might not be able to legally change some of the things that a person may want to do on their property, but that there could be guidelines that the planning commission could look at trying to find a way to obtain that result, whether it be through best practices when they're meeting with a potential remodel or rebuild on a house, to not shade
Solar placement?
for solar plate, for solar, retaining the solar, I want to say vulnerability, but
Integrity.
integrity for their neighbors, for the adjoining property owners. And that's something that, again, I think would need to go through staff and through legal and through the planning department to see if there's some kind of remedial action we can take to make sure that that happens. And however it works out, and again, we don't expect it at the next council meeting. We're, we understand it's going to take a while.
Thank you for that, Madam Mayor. And if I could, I just wanted to thank the staff who's worked hard on this issue for a number of months. A lot of time and effort was put into this, particularly John and Ken, Michael, Ingrid, and others. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I do appreciate all the hard work, and I appreciate all the work that the citizens have done, and the concerns that they've had, and concerns we've had, because again, when we're dealing with trying to make our laws work for us the best we can, when the state has put something else on the table, it takes a lot of work. So thank you all for your paying attention. And that will bring us to item N, which is to consider adoption of a resolution of the City Council amending the community health and safety element of the general plan to incorporate the City of Brisbane's 2021 local hazard mitigation plan into the element.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. State law requires the local hazard mitigation plan to be linked to the city's safety element. It's been updated a number of times. It was, last time the safety element was adopted or amended was in 2019, making reference to the 2016 LHMP. The state has advised us that we need to update our general plan to make reference to the 2019, the 2021 LHMP within our general plan. So we're making literally a one-line citation change in our general plan referencing the 2021 LHMP and not the 2016 LHMP. So that's the extent of the amendment, and it's required to maintain our eligibility for disaster relief funding. So recommending adoption of the resolution.
Great, thank you. Questions from council?
Nope.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. John, on page 133, under the footnotes, number 3, is a notation. The source, Vince Marsili, City of Brisbane Public Works Department, 1994, for anyone who wants a little nostalgia at this moment. It's really an interesting read in that it talks about debris flows in Brisbane, many of which I was not aware of, many of which are on those upper streets. It mentions Sierra Point, 405, Kings Road at San Mateo, Glen Parkway Tank, down Firth Canyon, etc. I mean, we could go through the whole thing. the part that kind of hit me between the eyes in the context of everything that we just have been talking about for the last hour is that it's the governor asking us, or directing us, I should say, to update our local hazard mitigation. And hazard mitigation, to me, hit me between the eyes. So we have a notation from 1994. I don't know that we've updated with footnotes about January of 2023 or any other occurrences in Brisbane. There may be more that I don't know about. But hazard mitigation and whether, you know, we've talked about declaration of restrictions. And it made me think, if our goal here is to mitigate hazards, and we've watched all these storms back east, and we heard tonight, Sherry Goodwin brought us a PowerPoint on problems with some of those upper streets. Are we really taking into account all of the hazards that we need to mitigate in Brisbane? Because it seems to me that this is not as comprehensive perhaps as it should be.
Yeah, I would concur this is not comprehensive at all. The LHMP is a creature of the state of California in terms of what its requirements are. And it's something we need to adopt to maintain funding eligibility. And that was done in 2021. And we did meet all the requirements of the state. So we are maintaining our eligibility in good standing. This is to continue that. Your bigger question is, yes, when the city gets around and has the opportunity to update its general plan holistically, absolutely there'll be a need to look at safety element. We actually have some amendments that are coming forward, primarily in relation to sea level rise and other geologic considerations, because there has been some updated mapping. So actually there is an ongoing effort that maybe will be before the council next year, actually. So some work has been done to try to update the safety element more holistically.
Okay, so this is kind of an offshoot, and it may require further discussion at a different meeting, but somehow I have to get into my other question, which is that if I buy an infill property up on one of these roads or in those lower acres that we saw on the maps tonight, and I apply for a permit, does the planning department warn me about these hazards that have been documented historically?
Anything that's mapped, that's in the records, yes, that information's available. This plan is available online. This is a little difficult because you're taking basically a kind of a personal observation,
Right.
which doesn't have any real mapping basis, and very, very broad. And then all these developers or any potential developer would be required to do the appropriate geotechnical and soils analyses before they would be able to proceed with any permitting.
Well, so my question coming to you is, again, from some experience on the Planning Commission, and we have 3 of us as former planning commissioners here. And when some projects are approved ministerially and some have to go before the Planning Commission. And there's different criteria that determine that. But from my recollection, not every project is required to do hydrological, geotechnical, or a safety assessment. And it begged the question for me, should they maybe be required to be reviewed in that vicinity, which is what the neighbors up there, the biggest investment anyone makes is their property and the health and safety of their family. And of course, if you're downhill from some of these properties, you're concerned about it. And you know some of the history, or you've lived in Brisbane enough to see it. And so my question is there a mechanism to trigger that so that it's not just if someone remembers, oh, maybe we should consider having them do this assessment, hydrological or geotechnical, but that maybe perhaps, we talked about declaration of restrictions. Is there, and that may not be the right mechanism. Is there a way that maybe we should start thinking creatively, seeing what's happened in the rest of the country, that there are parts of Brisbane that have historic events have happened that could be way worse, and that at the very least our due diligence under hazard mitigation is that we say to someone who's going to build in this area, you may, not will, but may be required to do additional studies, hydrological, geotechnical, or a safety assessment. So they know that up front. And it would offer a little greater assurance to the people downhill, because I've heard the stories about people getting water in their house from somebody upstream and worried about slippages and retaining walls and access and fire, that at least someone wanting to develop has a concept of what's going on there before they go the nth degree of paying for a permit and hiring a contractor. I'm sorry, that's long-winded.
No, if I could respond just real quickly, any project that involves more than 5 yards of grading would require a grading permit. So anything in the lower acres, the upper acres, anything in even the R1 zone that has any slope at all, practically speaking, is going to trigger a grading permit. And the requirements you're talking about in terms of geotechnical, geological stability, hydrology, those are all part and parcel to the grading permit review process. So, and that is a precursor to somebody coming in, those studies happen before somebody can design a project. So it's not like, well, I'm going to design a building and then I'm going to do all this geotechnical work after the fact. It's just that work gets done, and that sometimes drives people to either change their designs or maybe not proceed with the project. But that is kind of baked into our, again, as you know, it's some things are administrative or ministerial. That happens kind of under the purview of the city engineer. It's not something that is part of typically a public review process, but all those sort of safeguards are built into the review process today.
So what assurance can we give the public that on any project that might be in these areas, that is actually happening, and that we're not letting projects slip through where that level of due diligence and care is being exercised? I think that's what I'm looking for, because I think the people who have properties there, they're genuinely concerned, and I don't blame them. I mean, we've seen Asheville, North Carolina, with 17 inches of rain in a day, and Asheville never was on a flood map. We had last January 2023. What's to say we wouldn't have 10, 12 inches of rain in a day? And if you're downstream from that, you're genuinely concerned your house might. I've seen houses slip down hillsides. So it happens. It's frightening. It's frightening. And so I would at least want some assurance that if somebody's going to be building above me, that all of the mechanisms we have in place with our staff and our departments absolutely are covering all those bases. Not now and then, not by a certain property, but all of them that go through in those areas are giving that level of scrutiny and advice to the prospective builder, property owner.
Well, I mean, all documents are public documents. They're all available for review at the city, whether it's the Public Works Department or the Building Department, depending on what the project is. And yeah, our files are always available for inspection and review. If someone sees a project, they can call City Hall. They can get the information that supports the approval.
Well, I think it's after the fact, because we don't always have notification to the neighbors. And you find out when the truck rolls up and the construction workers jump out. And if you know, then you run down to City Hall, but it's prior to that. And if someone downhill has been getting water in their basement or in their living room, they may not know a project's going forward. And I think that's, somehow we need to start addressing these things. And I'm not sure the mechanism to do it. So my naivete in this is I grabbed onto that declaration of restrictions and said, what if we had a declaration for properties in those areas that we know have these potentials, that they will be given that information on the front end of any permit application, that they may, not will, but may be subject to a requirement for hydrological, geotechnical, and safety assessments.
Okay.
Can we look into whether we could do that? And I think it would provide a huge measure of security for our residents who've been talking about safety up on those upper streets for a long time. And I don't expect an answer tonight, but
Well, if the council provides direction on what exactly you're looking for, we can try to research what it is you're looking for.
I think while this has some nexus to what we're talking about here, I think that that's something that we really can't give direction
Yes,
on
exactly.
tonight because it's not directly related to this general plan amendment. It would be something, again, that would be looked at by planning and to see how that could be incorporated into whatever planning checklist there is to do that. But, you know, I think
I
it's,
totally understand, and I'm sorry, but this was the opportunity to bring it up, because when else will it be brought up?
well, we can
So we
certainly
could look into
put
it
on
and
our
bring
plate
it back
to
in
talk
the
about,
future. Yeah, thank you.
when staff actually can have some answers.
Yes.
So any other questions on this for,
No.
I have none.
okay, and Madison? No. Then I will go ahead and open the public hearing. Can I get, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this item? Seeing no hands, having no slips, is there anyone online that would like to comment on this? Can I get a first and a second to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Cunningham?
Aye.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz?
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin?
Aye.
And Mayor O'Connell.
Aye. Can I get a first and a second to adopt a resolution of the City Council of the City of Brisbane, amending the community health and safety element of the general plan to incorporate the City of Brisbane's 2021 local hazard mitigation plan into the element?
So moved.
Second.
And roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Cunningham?
Aye.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz?
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin?
Aye.
Mayor O'Connell.
Aye. Thank you. And then we go on to item N. Consider introducing an ordinance approving a zoning text amendment 2024 RZ2 citywide. Staff report, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor and Honorable City Council. Council held a public hearing on this item on June 6th, and then it was continued primarily to allow for more public outreach. And that was done in a number of ways. These were outlined in your packet, which was carried forward from July and ranged from a Star article to city manager's blast, social media. Most recently, staff provided informational materials at the Day in the Park. This ordinance touches on a number of different chapters in Title 17. These are primarily for compliance with Senate Bill SB 478, which became effective in January of 2022, and for compliance with the city's housing element, which was adopted last year. Just kind of briefly outline key topic areas. The updates were to comply, as I mentioned, with SB 478, and that would increase the allowable floor area limits in districts that allow multifamily development. And that would be to floor area ratios of 1.25 from the current 0.72. It would raise the allowable building heights for residential districts and mixed-use districts that allow for multifamily. That's consistent with the housing element, and that would be to 36-foot height limits. And I should note here that the housing element program only applied to multifamily zones. It did not apply to the R1 or RBA districts. So that's strictly optional. It was a recommendation by the Planning Commission to kind of equalize the heights across the different districts, given the connections of the districts throughout town. It would also restructure how the residential district development standards are presented for ease of use. It would update some of the exceptions to development regulations and procedures for approval to make exceptions a standalone chapter. Included in that is simplifying the ministerial procedure to streamline requests for reasonable accommodations for those with disabilities, and that's consistent with the housing element program as well. It would clarify the procedures for variances to be strictly a planning commission required application, not zoning administrator. The appeals chapter would be updated, and finally, the zoning administrator chapter would be updated for clarity and consistency with other chapters in Title 17. So in closing, staff recommends introduction of the ordinance 2024 RZ2. If you have questions for staff, I'd be happy to take them.
Okay, it sort of feels like we're doing the same thing that we've been doing over and over and over again tonight. But are there any questions for staff? Colleen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ken, page 70, under substandard lots, it mentions under number 1, bottom of the page, it says a substandard lot at least 5,000 square feet in area may be developed as a standard site. In central Brisbane, the lowlands, we don't have 5,000 square foot lots as a rule. So is 5,000 square feet the criteria, or is it what the standard lot size is in a specific district?
Give me a moment here. So,
Because central Brisbane lower was parsed out at 25 by 100 foot standard lots,
Right.
which are not 5,000 square feet. So am I at all being clear?
yes, so this is existing language in the chapter, and it does refer to the original subdivision map, which had 2,500 square foot lots as the standard. And so this is essentially recognizing those lots. If it was owned in common with a contiguous property at that time in the 70s, when they changed it to 5,000, essentially if it was owned in common, the two lots were considered now one lot. If they were not owned in common, you couldn't have two separate owners essentially owning that. So they would recognize 2,500 as
Standard.
existing non-conforming and essentially a standard lot, so that's why we have setbacks down to 3 feet to accommodate those on-site setbacks.
So
for smaller
this
lots.
then does apply exactly what it says. It has to be at least 5,000 square feet, no matter what district. Because you're saying two contiguous lots in the lower Brisbane would make your 5,000 at 2,500 each. But you'd have to have two contiguous, same owner, and it talks about October 27th, 1969. I'm just
Right.
trying to get a sense if someone in the lower part of Brisbane wanted to do this, would they have to have 5,000 square feet?
So if if they wanted to develop a lot and it's currently recognized as a lot of record, it could be 5,000 square feet, or it could be something less than that if in fact it was a standalone lot that was not essentially merged together with the 1969, I'd said 70s, but 1969 change in the zoning. So
You could do it on a 2,500 square foot lot.
correct. And
Okay.
we have plenty of examples of fairly recent development on those smaller parcels.
So could we maybe make sure the language addresses that? Because if I read this, I might just read it as it has to be 5,000 square feet or more. And it goes into, in number 2 and number 3, if lots owned in common with contiguous property on October 27th, 1969. And that it talks about substandard lots less than 5,000 square feet if it's owned in common with contiguous property.
Sorry. I think I've merged the two, number 1 and 2 in my argument or my response here. Yeah, so I think essentially you take both of these together, and if it's a lot of record that is that was recognized prior to 1969, and it was not required to be merged as of 1969, it could be recognized for development. So whether it's 5,000 square feet or if it's a lot of record that's less than 5,000 square feet, it can be developed if it's a lot of record. I'm not sure if I'm clear on that.
Are you looking for some different wording of this?
I think it's a little confusing. So
I
if
would agree
someone,
with you,
if
yes.
somebody in Lower Brisbane, where the 25 by 100 foot lots are, 2,500 square feet, and they didn't own a contiguous property on October 27th, 1969, what I'm hearing Ken say is they have these exceptions available to them. And I'm not sure that's clear in this wording.
I agree.
Somehow I think, because if I read number 2, I would say, well, I have 2,500 square feet, but I didn't own a contiguous property on October 27th, 69. Maybe I just bought this 2 years ago. But you're telling me if it's 2,500 square feet that I could go ahead. So can we maybe change this wording? That needs to be really clear.
So a less than 5,000 square foot lot, let's say a 2,500 square foot lot, cannot put 2 homes. Is that what this ordinance is saying? Is that what the intent of this is?
Essentially what this is in the R district, yes, you can develop one home on a lot that was 2,500 square feet. If it was a lot of record, you can develop one home on that. Now, with SB 9, that changes that, and somebody could split that and develop 2 lots on that now.
Just so we're clear too, this language is not, there's no amendment to this language. This is the way the code is written today. We're not proposing any changes to it. We could certainly clean it up or make it more clear, but we're proposing no substantive changes or any changes at all to this particular provision. They were pre-existing this amendment, and we're happy to clean it up to make it more clear. I see Councilmember Mackin's point. It's not the most well-written bit of text I've ever seen.
May I ask another question?
Please.
Or did you want to go?
Please.
Okay, so I had one other one. Chapter 17.56 zoning administrator.
What page?
I'm sorry, thank you. 84, and also, well, let's just start there. What precipitated the change in function of the planning director to be zoning administrator? And if it's the same, why the change in designation? And when I go under zoning administrator, action on applications, on item B, the zoning administrator shall have all the duties and responsibilities set forth in this title for the planning commission. And the wording starts becoming problematic here as well, because what it sounds like is things that used to go before the planning commission now are just going to be handled by a zoning administrator. Why or how did we suddenly have a zoning administrator?
So the zoning administrator is already carried out by the planning director. So that's an existing position, existing function, essentially, of the planning director. So items that might be subject to a public hearing or public notice that are not strictly administrative would rise to the zoning administrator level, which a number of the exceptions in another chapter in here actually do go and currently go to the zoning administrator. Some of them have gone to the planning commission.
So, well, because I'm looking at red line, and the red line said zoning administrator. And under 17.56030, zoning administrator action on application. So what we should be paying attention to are what's in red. The administrative design review in POAZ would be going to the zoning administrator, not the planning commission, unless it's referred by the zoning administrator to the planning commission.
And that's just strictly a consistency item with that other chapter that on the PAOZ, those applications already go to the zoning administrator.
Okay.
So this was just a consistency item.
And then we took out number 10 on variances, accessibility improvements, large family daycare homes. I guess I'm trying to get a gist of, are we cleaning up things that maybe should have been cleaned up before and this is the opportunity to do it? Or are these major changes? What's precipitating the major changes?
These are really just cleanups. For instance, variances are referred to the planning commissioner, but there was also a section in here that mentions that they can go to the zoning administrator. But if you go to the variances section, it's essentially that in that particular case, it's a matter of historical practice as well as consistency. And so we had suggested that it stay with the planning commissioner, as has been the past practice. Accessibility improvements, this was essentially to address, and there's another section in here that addresses accessibility improvements, and it's really to facilitate people being able to add, say, a ramp for access to their residence, to their property, and to make that really a ministerial act by the planning director based on specific criteria that are listed in that section.
So that
Large
is
family
That
daycares.
is a change?
That is a change.
So
yes.
these are not, these are not practices that have already been in place. These are changes.
It's some of both.
Okay.
In the case of variances, it's practices. In the case of accessibility improvements, it would allow for ministerial review process.
Okay, because I look on page 97.
Through the chair,
Yes.
a lot of these are driven by housing element, and if you want Ken to go through some, which ones we're committed to doing under the housing element, like the accessibility, we're glad to do that. There's a reason we're proposing these changes, for.
That's what I'm trying to get at. What is the reason behind these changes?
So there is a program within the housing element that essentially says that the city will look at ways to improve accessibility permitting for those with disabilities. And
Okay,
so
but I
it's-
mean, is this to make approvals faster, more ministerial? That's kind of what I'm getting at. Because later on page 97, it talks about instead of naming the planning commission as the only approving authority on minor modifications, those amendments may be approved by the zoning administrator or the planning commission. So it makes me wonder, why are we doing that? It seems like it's taking away a little bit of the review process of the planning commission. And maybe there's a reason why that has to happen, but that's what I'm asking.
Right, so within kind of stepping back to the exceptions section in the general use regulations, there was a mix of different ways that those different applications were being handled. And so part of this was really to normalize what were more minor types of applications versus a variance that has a higher threshold for approval, higher findings for approval, and keep those at the zoning administrator level. So there is a lot packed in here, and there's some of these are really directly related to housing element, like the accessibility improvements. Others are just organizational cleanups. Others are, as I mentioned on the variances, a past practice. So it is a mix of different items. And so if there's any one of these that is of concern to you, definitely we can, it's up to the council if you want to pull that out.
No, I think in general, I just, my first impression was we have a zoning administrator, and I had read the planning commission section, and we had a resident talking about why a zoning administrator. It was a legitimate question. And then I went, well, are we removing part of the authority of the planning commission? And why would we be doing that? And while, I dearly love John Swecky, but someday he's going to retire, and I want to feel like I can trust his successor. And if we remove part of the authority of the planning commission, then I'm concerned.
And I will mention that page 87 has, this is a new requirement that was added. So this is reporting decisions to the planning commission. All decisions of the zoning administrator that are subject to public hearing shall be reported to the commission at least 7 days prior to the expiration of the appeal period. And then also added essentially is if any two members of the commission indicate that they'd like to have that brought to the commission, they may do so. So we use city council as the model for that new procedure. So they would still get notice. They could hear these applications if they chose to bring that forward.
Is that
or the
7
public.
business days or 7 days? Because then you've got to have 5 planning commissioners who are paying attention to everything. And the time it would take for 2 of them to get together and go, okay, we've got so many days and we need to appeal this.
It's 7
That-
days.
7 days, exactly.
I thought it said 10 days.
Well, there's a section where it talks about 10 days. It used to be 15 days, and it was reduced.
Item 4.
The 7 days is just for notice to the planning commission.
I mean,
So within that, so
it's-
it could be at 9 days essentially.
Yeah. It's putting it's then making it incumbent on the planning commission to pay attention to other things going on rather than just what's put in front of them. They would have to be monitoring these things and making sure they are reading those emails. That's all I have.
So I do have one question, if I may. On page 84, 17.56.030, item 3, it says that something that'd be sent to just the zoning administrator, height and setback exception modifications. So is that saying that just a modification to height, so someone could go higher with the height, or wider, less on a setback without anybody else knowing, besides the zoning administrator?
So an example of a setback exception would be, for instance, a deck in the rear setback could be as close as 5 feet to the rear property line. Somebody, if they could apply for a setback exception modification to ask for that to be 4 feet, for example. And that
And
would
that's
go,
after a building permit's already been issued.
no, this would be before a building permit.
So a setback exception modification is for just ancillary building, not to the home itself.
Correct. It would be for such things as eaves, stairs, decks, those sorts of
So
items.
somebody's steps could encroach in the setbacks with just a ministerial
Correct.
and under current law, is that how it is? Our current regulations?
Yes, so there is a modification. Let me, give me a
I'm not sure.
moment to find that.
I'm not sure what the word modification means in that context.
A proposed amendment to the zoning.
And that would not be a, trying to think of the word. I have too many words in my head right now.
A planning commission
It
hearing?
wouldn't be
Trigger?
It would be a zoning administrator item for public hearing.
and it wouldn't require a waiver from, okay. And how would adjacent property owners be notified of that kind of thing? I mean, if you've got somebody's stairway going up within your side setback, I think that's pretty important to be aware of.
Right, so the notice would be to adjacent property owners and a
Before it was
recollection-
approved.
Before it was approved, 10 days in advance, as I recall. Yes, 10 days.
The number of days are in the planning commission report on page 100, under appeals? Is that, oh, you're talking about
No, I'm
notifications,
just saying on
sorry.
a zoning
This-
administrator.
This would be page 87.
Okay.
but that's just for an appeal.
It's a notice of recommended action in that case. So essentially, the action would be published and would be provided to the public or the intended action 10 days in advance. If no public comments were received, then the action would go forward.
Well,
And if public comments were received, then a public hearing would be required under, it's in the middle of page 87, under B.
but if it's mailed 10 days in advance, they get it 2 days later, and they've got to have it in, so it's giving people like one business week to say, oh my God, this affects me. Hopefully they open their mail. Okay. Any other questions for staff?
Yes. So, Ken, with the SB 478, it increases the floor area ratio for multifamily development. All right, so we had 0.72, so now it's up to 1.25. Has anyone applied for the new FAR?
No.
No one's done that yet. Okay. And then, there was a recommendation from the Planning Commission to have the height of a single-family dwelling go from potentially 28 to 30 feet up to 36 feet.
That's correct.
Okay, and the only reason for that is just for consistency. If in the multi-family area, which like San Bruno, for example, San Bruno Ave, that they're allowed to go to 36 feet. So then someone across the street or around the corner, say on Alvarado, could then go up to 36 feet just so that it's consistent. Is that the thought process?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying.
Madam Mayor, I have one more clarifying
Please.
question. Ken, on page 87, under public hearing when required, under item B, letter I, if written public comments objecting to the recommended decision are received that relate to the required findings, the zoning administrator shall hold a public hearing on the application. Is that a planning commission public hearing, or is that a zoning administrator public hearing? Because then it references it down in number 4, decisions of the zoning administrator that are subject to public hearing shall be reported to the planning commission by email.
Right. So under B2, the zoning administrator, or if referred to the planning commission, may grant or deny the application following the public hearing. Well, so he can, or she could refer it to the planning commission directly or hold a public hearing.
You mean the
If
zoning administrator would hold a public hearing?
Right.
Why would that not be a planning commission public hearing?
I think that would be a case-by-case decision by the zoning administrator. If the concerns seemed like they potentially might be resolved in with further information in a public hearing at that level, or it could be referred forward. So if that's something that the commission would prefer directly to go to the planning commission. That's certainly an option.
Well, it just seems to make sense because you're holding a public hearing with a zoning administrator and then you're telling the planning commission the outcome and then they could appeal it. Why wouldn't you just have the zoning administrator there with a planning commission public hearing and it takes care of both? It just seems to kind of make more sense.
Well, you can do that. Certainly the practice is today, and actually in the ordinance, it's already baked in where the zoning administrator has that ability. So that's how it's been. But if you want to take that away and make it a automatic referral to the commission, that's the commission, that's council's prerogative.
I mean, a lot of these things don't happen that often. How often does that really happen?
None since I've had a zoning administrator hearing.
There you go.
Although I've had people show up with inquiries that there may not have been an objection, they may just have questions about the matter. So would those be referred to would anything have to be referred to the council, to the planning commission? Is that your intent?
Well, I think it just starts seeming a little onerous that then two members of the planning commission, if they don't agree, they have to appeal it. If it just went to the planning commission in a public hearing, it just makes it straightforward. The public's used to that. They'd show up, the planning commission's there, and so is the zoning administrator. So it kind of takes care of it all.
It's council's prerogative how you want to handle that.
If I may have a follow-up question. So, Ken, going back to the recommendation for the R1 height up to 36. So if a property owner decides to apply for SB 9 and they were granted SB 9 status, then they could go up to 35 feet. Is that correct?
As the zoning is now, it's up to 30 feet in the R1 and it's up to 35 feet in the RBA. And so
Okay.
if somebody applies for a SB 9 application, not talking about the setback area, but the core of the site, those would be the standards that would apply.
So
If
they
the-
have to, so the current standard is the 28 to 30 feet, but if they apply for SB 9, then they could go higher.
No,
No?
no.
Okay.
It's whatever the height of the district is, the underlying district standards. So if council chooses to raise the height to 36, that would apply to regular development or SB 9 development. If you keep it at 28 to 30 in the R1 and keep it at 35 in the RBA, that's what would apply to SB 9 as well.
Oh, okay. All right. So, so just to, again, just so I'm understanding this. So with SB 9, if someone applies for SB 9 in the 4-foot setback, they could go up to 35 feet, but now we've passed the ordinance, so that's going to be 25 feet
Right.
in the setback.
Correct.
Okay. But then, okay, that's 25 feet in the 4-foot setback, go about 6 feet, then you can go up to 35.
Right. Outside that setback zone, interior to the lot.
And that is in the R1.
35 is currently in the RBA. 30 is the limit for the R1, and that's for lots with slopes over 20%. If it's less
okay.
than 20%, then 28 feet is the current limit.
All right, all right.
Historically, going back to the early 90s, there was a change. There was actually a reduction in the height from, it was at 35 in the R1 at that time. So there are some homes that are taller, that are older homes. So
Okay.
this would be going back closer to those older limits.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So, is it possible to tie the multifamily housing, because you say that the FAR stays the same if it's still a single-family home, correct?
Correct.
Can't we leave the lower height in it if it's a single-family home? Otherwise, we're just encouraging building the McMansions that,
Yes.
and so for me, it's one thing if we're trying to get a production of additional housing by having multifamily homes, and allowing them a larger footprint and taller, bigger, whatever. But I don't think that we really want to be encouraging that kind of development randomly next to, the cute little cottage homes that we have in most of our areas, to encourage the, 6,200 square foot home that can be 36 feet tall. So I have a problem with that kind of height going in our smaller lot sizes and our smaller height adjacent homes. Forget the solar, that's for sure. Although on a little tiny home, solar probably doesn't make sense. But it just seems to me that we're going too tall. And if we don't have to do that because of the housing laws, I don't see why we would be encouraging that just because, if you're on San Bruno Avenue or Visitation, you can go that high. Why should you be able to do it on the side streets when those are meant to be more intimate housing locations?
So would you, you're talking about within the multifamily districts, those homes that develop with I think it's a single family or a duplex would limit to the current standard versus multifamily?
Maybe I misunderstood. I thought you wanted to, thinking about not changing the height limit in the R1 zone. Is that where you were headed?
I'm thinking that. I'm not really sure. I mean, I've been more concentrated on the other issues we've had tonight than this one necessarily. And that's bad on me that I didn't get through all the planning documents that I should have. But 36 feet in the R1 seems really tall if we're saying it's a single family home. And, with all the SB9, availability to put two homes on a lot and to be able to go really high and at a bigger FAR, so you're going to have lots more space. If our goal is to allow people to have 2 or 3 homes to help with housing production and, keep people within the environmental friendly framework of not having the 4,000, 6,000 square foot homes, to be in the spirit of SB9, which is affordable housing and not mega mansions. And I think that by going to 36 feet, we're encouraging mega mansions.
And that is an option, totally an option. It was a recommendation that came from the Planning Commission. As they were looking through this, it was not specified in the housing element that single-family homes would be raised to 36, that those districts It was,
Well, we're saying that their FAR has to stay smaller if it's a single-family home.
right.
But we're still saying they can go really tall. And it seems that sort of, I don't know, oxymoronic to be putting it that way. And I don't get all the planning stuff,
I have a question.
100%.
So, say, given the funky nature of our R1 district, say we keep the height lower for the most part, but we do allow exceptions for some of these crazy sloped lots. If somebody needs to go over that to put their heat pump in an attic or whatever it is, can we do that?
Certainly.
Right, so we don't have a blanket 36 feet. But if it's, I mean, I know a lot of these sloped lots and people would like to do certain things.
Madam Mayor,
For a variance.
may I ask a question?
Yeah, there are some exceptions for height provided in the zoning as it is and as it's proposed, and such things as a chimney could go over the height limit. Yeah, solar also has an allowance for an extra 2 feet off any roof deck, and that would be ministerial. If they go beyond 2 feet, then it becomes a zoning administrator item. I don't think there's not mechanical equipment except for accessibility, like for a elevator. So that falls into the ministerial category for people with disabilities to be able to put a elevator in.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
First of all, I would make a motion, we extend the meeting for how long? Another
Half an hour.
half an hour?
I'll second. Roll call.
Councilmember Cunningham?
Aye.
Councilmember Davis? Councilmember Lenz?
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin?
Aye.
Mayor O'Connell?
Aye.
Sorry, I.
So I also wanted to ask you, Madam Mayor, you brought up the R1 district, but when you first mentioned single-family homes and the 36-foot height limit, you also mentioned R3. Are you also including single-family homes in R3? Because R3, of course, has multifamily, but it also has a lot of single-family. And so would you grant 36 feet to single-family homes as well?
I would never want to see a 36-foot single-family home.
Well, and I bring it
But
up,
in an
bec-
R3,
they're 25 by 100-foot lots. So a 36-foot high single-family home is tall on a 25 by 100-foot lot. It's tall.
we had so many people who put their, drawings together of what, SB 9 could look like, and the massing and the scale. And to me, it's one thing up at the ridge and you see all these huge condos and duplexes and things, and from the street, the duplexes at least don't look as big as they really are, because you're seeing them from entry level. But I think that's not going to be quite the case in our Flatlander streets. On the hillsides, I think that, and I remember from past meetings where the Planning Commission measures from partially up the slope on some of the slope streets to allow for, how things need to be stepped into the
How you
hillside.
would see it.
But I don't know what personally, I'm not seeing what the effect of that 36-foot, especially if we aren't measuring from street level, we're measuring from wherever that initial measurement level is going. So it's going to seem even more grand uplift.
So are we in the council discussion part?
I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know how to see that.
'Cause yeah, no, I hear you. Just if we want to ask maybe some members of the public who want to.
Sure. Why don't we ask? I'll open up the public hearing. Are there any members of the public who'd like to speak on this issue? Seeing no hands, do we have any members in the audience?
All right.
Seeing no one there, I'll get a motion to close the public hearing
So moved.
Second.
and roll call vote.
Councilmember Cunningham?
Aye.
Councilmember Davis?
Just had a raised hand.
Aye. Oh. No more raised hand. Okay, Councilmember Lenz?
Yeah.
Councilmember Mackin?
Aye.
And Mayor O'Connell.
Aye. Anyway, I guess I was getting into discussion, but it's more that I don't have a good grasp of how that massing would really be.
Sure. These laws, right? I mean, they're put upon us, and they're definitely, overreaches on our local planning decisions. But of course, we have to abide by them. This particular item in regards to raising to 36 feet, that's a recommendation by the Planning Commission. I personally think that we should just take that out. No, thank you, but no, we're going to leave the current regulation of height in place. But what we have to do in regards to SB 478, of course, we have to adopt that.
I'm all for doing what we are required by law. But I hate to be putting these new standards in that, will change. I was reading about the lots and the lot split, and I have 4 lots personally. And, nobody's going to do anything to my property till they carry me out. But, somebody is, going to tear that down, and they'll be able to do lot splits and all sorts of things. I mean, it'll be 5
Perhaps.
units by the time whatever happens. But, it just seems that we're over indulging on height. And if it's something that we have to do, but if it's not something we have to do, I'm not happy to do it.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with what's said. I mean,
sitting with
we're not curtailing
Former
any
planning commissioners.
multi-unit housing by just retaining what we had for single-family homes. So that's good.
And I don't know how we would go about making those changes. Would need to bring it back? Would we need to give you more specific guidelines in that respect? Or,
I think it's pretty straightforward. You don't want to change the height limit in the R1 zone and the RBA zone. Is that correct?
Yes.
Pretty straightforward. But I know Councilmember Mackin had a lot of technical issues with zoning administrator review and all that. I don't know how you want to resolve that. But the height limit is fairly easy to deal with. It's just make that change tonight if that's.
I mean, I would want to make sure on the zoning administrator reviews that, affected property owners have time to respond when they get a notification that there's going to be a modification and a variance. That was the word I was looking for earlier. A variance issue, basically a variance. It's a modification, but it's a variance. And, not having the public hearing, where it's, oh, I've got to go and just one-on-one confront this, is a little different than going before the public commission, the planning commission, that's going to weigh things, and people, I don't know if people will think it's getting the same amount of consideration if some of these things are just zoning administrator issues. And I think having a bigger deck, and it's one thing if it's ground level and it's behind somebody's fence and it's abutting up into the side setbacks, but it could be on 3 levels that their deck is going to be abutting into their setbacks. And then they're looking at the stairwell and the deck instead of, hopefully a nice house. So I think some of the setback issues should be taken out of the purview of the zoning administrator. I think that it would be possible if it's a matter of a couple inches here or there, that's a zoning administrator type of thing to say, oh yeah, you can't fit what you need to fit in there without encroaching into the setback a little bit. And I'm not sure where that line should be, and I've never sat on the planning commission, so I can't answer how big of deal that is for the planning commission to look at.
Well, you've got 5 people's good brains noodling on something, which I think is a good thing.
I agree, yeah.
You've got 5 people that are thinking, this person wants to do this, how can we make it happen? Or, no, that's outrageous and we can't make it happen.
I'm not sure what direction to give in that respect, but I know that the setback exception did bother me, especially with the increased FAR, that it just gives an easier way to just build bigger.
So are we asking staff to come back with?
I don't know.
I think maybe we need to. I hate to say that, but I mean, we're starting to get into lots of detail, and
I'm just curious, if someone wanted to build, say, that stairway or that deck into the setback, they would need a variance, correct?
If it's a part of the structure that is identified as a setback exception, then the setback exception modification would be the tool. Something, for instance, like the height of a house going over the height limit would still be a variance and would go to the planning commission. So it's really not changing those kind of things, but it's an eave is allowed to go into the setback a certain amount. If somebody wanted to extend that further, they would need to do a modification.
It sounds like there could be quite a few, situations, right? It's hard to, identify, so many things, right? It's just, and I guess that's what you're asking for, is for the administrator to weigh what makes sense for them to approve or not approve or send to the planning commission.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes, and I should mention, something that's included in here is essentially on page 85 and 86 is different types of modifications, from substantial conformance to minor modification to major modification. And the major modifications are really those that would be more significant and often might just be referred straight to the planning commission by the zoning administrator.
So, what is being recommended? How different is that from what already currently exists?
as it currently exists, it's all over the map. So we have certain applications that go to the zoning administrator, others that go to the planning commission. And so this was all within that exceptions section of the title. So
All right.
this was an effort to try to corral those into a single process. But the exceptions themselves have not really, most of them have not changed, but there are some redlined ones that are.
Got it. So do you all feel like the window's kind of opened up more, or do you feel like if the window was closed a little bit in regards to what the administrator would approve as opposed to having it go
Well,
before the planning commission?
I have a question on page 85. Minor modifications that result in minor changes to an approved planning application. So this has already been approved and there's a minor change.
Okay,
That I can see as going to a zoning administrator, but not in the upfront planning process.
right.
That, and so I'm not sure that was carried out. Maybe item B, minor modifications on page 85, is setting the rule for when a zoning administrator comes in instead of it being planning commissioner. Is that?
Sorry, let me take you back a section. You are correct. So page 80 is exception modification procedures, and there are findings for height and setbacks.
Okay,
What page is that?
where,
Page 80,
Oh, page 80.
page 80.
80, section 060. And you have number 2, setback exception modifications may be approved for structures or features listed. And here it gives the different findings for how that's reviewed. As well as the noticing and appeals. The procedure for the action goes back to chapter 1756, which we were just in. So in the procedures, that's where we get into the notice of recommended decision on the action. And one thought that I had, I know the council mentioned a concern about the timeliness and somebody having to watch for the notice. The 10-day appeal period is standard even for the planning commission, but the recommended decision, the action, that might be something that council may want to increase that from 10 days to.
So I have a question in reading that section on page 81, first item B. The appearance of the fence, hedge, or wall is compatible with the design, appearance, and scale. So a big-ass house can have a big-ass wall as a exception because everything's big. So the scale goes with the size of the house on what the exception could be. And that doesn't make sense to me. You know what I mean?
No, I totally.
I'm looking at
yeah,
you and
yeah,
I'm
no,
saying that
I
doesn't
get
make
it.
sense to me.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
And that's at the first application for a permit. And I apologize for not reading this document enough to get the full gist.
I think if I may, the difficulty here is that so many of these things are subjective. And one person's opinion will be different from another. But as Councilmember Cunningham said, the Planning Commission has 5 minds and usually try to be fairly balanced and talk it through, which at least seemingly provides the public and an applicant with a fair resolution where someone doesn't say, well, that's just that zoning administrator's opinion. Does that make sense?
Through the chair, I'm looking at the time and also considering where the council is in their conversation. Let me put something on the table and see if it makes some sense.
Yes, please.
I think that, generally speaking, I think that the staff understands the desire of the council to see this, see elements of this revised in a way that brings a level of objectivity, as Councilmember Mackin has stated, bringing some of that back to the Planning Commission. And just in a brief conference with John, I think we're totally fine bringing that back to the Planning Commission for further discussion with them so they understand the guidance from the council, and we can bring the product back at a future date. We appreciate the commentary. This has been really helpful for us understanding where the council is on these matters.
If I may, Madam Mayor?
Please.
Yeah, I mean, sort of thinking, while we're having this discussion, thinking back to being a planning commissioner and at times thinking that something that was before me was ridiculous. And then being enlightened with other opinions was very helpful for the applicant. So, yeah, please.
So, on that note, I'd make a motion to continue this hearing to another date that is conducive to staff.
There's no motion needed. They just directed us, and I think we're
Well,
fine.
don't I need to make a formal motion to continue the meeting to a later date? I believe I do.
I'm looking at the clerk and our attorney.
I do.
Okay.
So if someone will second that motion.
Second.
Okay, thank you.
Motion
And-
was from the mayor.
Pardon, yes.
Okay.
And a roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Cunningham,
Aye.
Councilmember Davis,
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz,
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin,
Aye.
and Mayor O'Connell.
Aye, thank you. So, city managers report on upcoming activities.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. A few fun activities coming up in the next few weeks. And as a reminder to the public, we won't have a council meeting the 5th weekend of the month.
I'm sorry.
The 5th week of the month. So a couple weeks. So I'm going to catch up on a couple dates here. First is October 19th, the Spooky Splash event at the pool. Kids can come out and play at that event. That's tomorrow night. October 27th, we have a Diwali celebration event at the library. This is the second year, as I understand it. It was very well attended last year, and we're looking forward to seeing many more people this year as well. And October 28th, the Halloween dog costume potty. Boy, that is a hard one to say, particularly at this time. And I think everyone knows what that is. And if I may ask the mayor's indulgence, there's one thing I'd like to share tonight. The city received a very prestigious award. And 2 members of the staff, Caroline Chung and Adrian Etherton, were in attendance tonight at the League of California Cities to receive the Helen Putnam Award for Excellence in 2024. These awards are awarded to cities that do great work in the sustainability field. We were one of 10 awardees. This is something to celebrate. So I'm very glad that my predecessor suggested making the application, and we're really happy that we had staff on hand. So thank you for allowing me to share that.
Thank you. And then countywide assignments and subcommittee reports. Who would like to start?
I don't think I have
Madison,
any.
do you want me to take public art? You look busy.
Yes.
Okay, So we had a fabulous public art meeting. Actually, we've had a couple. We had another one this week because we had to squish things in real fast. And we selected two firms to work on the staircase between San Benito and Alvarado. One of them is going to be doing the lighting, the bollards, the railing, and the other firm is going to be doing mosaics on the staircase, if it all works well. So we got together with the entire committee and went through all of the amazing applications. So many incredible artists from around the country want to work with us at this point. So it was very heartening that we have that level of interest from top-notch artists who came before us. And via a selection of raising our hands, we chose these two artists. We met with one of the artists on Monday, and there will be a collaboration between Public Works and the artists relative to the staircase and the bollards and the lighting for all practical and aesthetic purposes. So we were all very excited. And do you want to add anything, Madison? Did I miss something?
Yeah. So I would just add that we initially were planning to just, want to hire one artist, but then we realized, for example, we were leaning towards hiring a mosaicist, and then we realized that with mosaic stairs, you experience the art only in one direction when you're going up the stairs, but when you're coming down the stairs, you don't see it. We also felt that having standard lighting and standard railings with the more industrial that look, it wouldn't pair well with the stairs being so gorgeous with the mosaics. So with the tiles, so we thought that having an artful railing and lighting would make it feel like one cohesive area, and so that you would be able to experience art no matter how you were traveling the stairs. And so we envision both of those artists actually working cohesively with each other to make sure that it's one vision for the stairs and that the work complements each other. But we're really excited about what's coming, and the council will get to see more of that at the next meeting, I believe.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
Cliff, did you have any meetings?
I don't think so. Unless someone can remind me.
Sorry, I'm not good at that.
I don't think I had one, so Colleen.
I have a matter that I'd like to bring up since it's under Mayor Council Matters. Meeting we had in September, we voted on the state and local fiscal recovery funds. And there were $150,000 allocated to the Crocker Trail CEQA plan, $45,000 to Mission Blue renovation designs, leaving a balance of $695,000. I would like that put on a future agenda for the council to consider applying that to our budget deficit before December 31st, 2024.
Thank you. Through the chair, understand that there was interest in the matter, having spoken to Councilmember Mackin about it. I've been checking with staff. If we're happy to do that for clarity purposes, we understood per the action that $695,000 would be applied to the loss recovery, but we're happy to do it to formalize it and make sure that everything's above board.
Great.
I thought when we had that meeting, whatever we didn't spend was going to go to that.
But we didn't explicitly state it, so yeah, I think it should go to replacing the TOT or however we need to word it to make it official.
No problem. I think it'd be a very quick item, so we're happy to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And I have one more thing.
Oh, please.
And this is under mayor and council matters as well. This weekend is the San Mateo County Home Electrification Tour, and my home is on tour this year. So it's from 11 to 3. You do have to register, I believe, with the county to come, but we've got all the materials there and can't wait to show you how to cook cleaner.
You know, I do want to say one thing as well. With the draft EIR and the comment period for the quarry, right? When you're out canvassing, you're getting a lot of questions. And so, staff's done a really good job of putting out the CEQA facts. One of the things that might be helpful is to have a flow chart of like how the process works. Like reading it.
Excellent idea.
Right? Reading it is one thing, but seeing a flow chart of how it all plays out, how it eventually will come to us, I think would be helpful for the community.
I totally agree.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. I'll speak to the Community Development Director about amending the FAQs.
Thank you.
So, Madam Clerk, were there any written communications?
There were none, Madam Mayor.
Okay. And that brings us to oral communications number 2. Are there any members of the public who'd like to speak on an item that was not on our agenda? Seeing no hands raised, is there anyone online? Okay, so I will adjourn the meeting at 11 o'clock in memory of these people who lost their lives in the Loma Prieta quake 35 years ago tonight. Thank you all so much. This meeting is adjourned.